Thank you all for coming. My name is Mike Ortosky. I'm the Community and Rural Development Agent here in Orange County. A number of things, manage the Breeze Farm, part of the Ag Grant program, and a number of things like that. My background is in soils and land planning and all sorts of things, so this is kind of near and dear to my heart. We've got a ton of really good speakers today, resource people from the county and nonprofit and all over. It's going to be fast and furious. Each speaker has 25 minutes. You already hear that, speakers? 25 minutes. And we'll probably try to hold maybe for one question or two short questions at the end of each speaker's time. But then at the end, you'll see, if you've got your agenda there, we've left about 35, 40 minutes at the end, but all the speakers will still be here, and we're going to have a general discussion about everything you've heard today. So we've got, as you see on the agenda, we've got 7 different speakers. Andrew Branan will be the first here in just a second from NC State to talk about natural resource law, real property, farmland, succession, and other things. Very high overview of that. We have there, fortunately, have the Orange County planning staff folks, Cy Stover and Pat Mallet in the back. They'll be talking about land planning and land use issues relative to agriculture, agritourism, and a number of things. Dana Hall from the tax office talk about PUV compliance and so forth. Chris Herney, who's Lands Legacy Program Manager, he'll be talking about that program and working lands easement that the county holds. Margaret Sands, after the break, with the Private Land Conservancy, she'll be talking about wildland and working lands easements from their TLC nonprofit point of view. Jessica Perrin from Soil and Water here right down the hall. And a couple of her folks will be talking about voluntary ag districts and some of the conservation planning programs they have. And last, we have A.K. Kelly, who's the forest ranger here, located right across the lobby. She'll be here to talk about forest management and forest protection and so forth. And then we'll finish up with a general Q&A discussion. So for those of you that know, this is the Bonnie Davis Center. The man in the pink shirt in the back is Jonathan Smith. He's the extension director for the county. And so the back rooms, if you go out this door, you just turn to the right. They're immediately on the left. If you go out that door, you turn to the left, they're immediately on the right. There's water fountains. There's one you can fill up a water bottle and that sort of thing. We just put out some of the snacks. We don't have breakfast and we don't have lunch, so we're cheaping out on this. This is great. So we wanted to make it very kind of condensed and get a lot done during that time. So what else? Let's see. Anything, Jonathan?
The meeting today is going to be recorded.
Oh, that's right.
We know a lot of folks in the middle of the day can't get here in the middle of the week, so we want that available for the future. Some of this changes from time to time. A lot of the content you see is pretty consistent year to year, and so we want to make this accessible in the future. So we'll be uploading this to YouTube, and we'll share the links with you afterwards. We encourage you to share it with others. Just know that you can see the green lights on the ceiling. This means that you're being recorded. So, like, if you're having a conversation, just maybe try to keep them kind of quiet because it could pick you up. But we want those mics to be on so that if you ask questions of the presenters, the Zoom picks it up and the recording gets it. So we can put context with that in the video. Depending upon how we structure, we may do one big video, we may do separate videos, but hey, we just want to be aware of that. So keep your cussing to a minimum and have a good time today. But just know that during the session, presenters and stuff like that, we're going to be recording during the breaks and things like that. We'll leave it on, but we'll cut those pieces out so you can talk like normal during those times. Okay? Any questions? Anyone have concerns about that? All right, we appreciate it. Thank you.
And we, for the record, I think we set the cutoff at 60 people, and we were full with registrations. And then we had about 6 or 8 or 9 or 10 people that came in later and said we'd like to attend, and we were like, it's fine. So we're certainly not quite at capacity yet. Probably people will be coming in as we go, we hope. But it's always important. We have sessions like this at the Ag Summit each year. It's always very well attended, and the dialogue is pretty realistic about what's happening with land, agricultural land, all sorts of aspects regarding, as we said, bona fide farm issues, prisoners' valuation issues, agritourism issues, easement issues, and we hope to cover a lot of that, like I said, in a fairly rapid pace today. Any thoughts or comments from anybody before we get underway here? Any questions about what we're up to? And so one last 2 or 3 comments. So this is a hot topic with the Board of Commissioners right now. we are going to be presenting the new version of the Agricultural Viability and Farmland Stewardship Plan to the Board of Commissioners on the 2nd of June. That is kind of a rework, a complete rework of the Farmland Preservation Plan that Orange County did in 08, 09, something like that. And we worked on it for a couple of years and got a lot of information together on that. It talks about everything from sort of economic support and of farming as a business and protection of farmland as well. And it's a huge document. So that is actually on our website as well. But if you keyword that long name that I laid out, Agricultural Viability and Farmland Stewardship Plan for Orange County, it'll pop up. And then we also, if you go to just keyword NC Cooperative Extension Orange County Center, we've got a lot of the things that we'll be talking about today on there as well, and things that we're not talking about today. And the Land Summit was advertised there as well. So we'll, as Jonathan said, we'll follow up with some of the recordings for this meeting and so forth. So with that, if there's no further questions, I'm going to bring up Andrew Branan. I'm going to change the screen here to the presentation. Thank you to all the speakers for attending. So it's a busy time for everybody. Andrew Branan serves as Associate Extension Professor with Agricultural Resource Economics Department of the College of Ag and Life Sciences at NC State University. He's a lawyer who concentrates in agriculture, real property, and natural resource law with a focus on farm and farmland succession. He's managed a solo practice here in Hillsborough for a number of years and is with NC State now and is sort of the go-to person statewide for all land issues from the standpoint of real estate law. And we really appreciate Andrew being here. And let me just split out.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I'm just gonna start talking. That's okay.
Yeah.
And that was over generous. Whenever somebody's reading a bio that I fear that I wrote like 5 years ago or something else, I start cringing. Like, yeah, it sounds bigger than it was. Mike certainly maybe out to be bigger than I am. But I really appreciate the invitation to come talk to y'all in what is kind of, I consider my home county. I came from Houston, Texas, but raised my family up off Jericho Road in Cedar Grove for 20 years before we moved to Chapel Hill in 2018. So good to be back home. Yep. Is there a clear from?
Do you have to do it?
Yeah, I got to here. And so I very much appreciate Orange County putting on this type of format. To where we really focus just like on some of the mundane issues about land, the property tax, the zoning, the regulation, but also the opportunities and kind of the way we, I think policy-wise, approach encouraging landowners to keep their land in ag use as permeable surface for water quality, things like that. So that's kind of what I think our focus is here. I'm going to start us off at a really high level from a very long time ago. And my bona fides, if I can. So where I'm coming to y'all, I'm really today here because I got 20 minutes to talk, just presenting y'all as an extension resource. My program, as I call it, is Farm Law and Tax for Producers and Landowners. And as Mike said, I really try to, from my now perch at Cooperative Extension at NC State, I have sort of have the bandwidth to really dive into a lot of these topics. And Mike was describing me as a lawyer. Yeah, that's my background and training, but now I see myself really as a legal educator, trying to translate law, translate regulation to y'all. And so I'm always trying to perfect it, but it's always an ongoing process. But I did the work. I practiced law right out of, those of y'all that remember Banditos, I was up there, one of Cy Hoag's offices for years and years, wonderful space. And in my role at NC State, I create resources, I have a website I'll show you, and I teach. I 50% of my job is teaching undergrads and the Agricultural Institute 2-year program and the 4-year students. And I teach generally in agricultural law and environmental law, which is a lot of land use, just a lot of law applied to farming and forestry, and then environmental law is really a review of our federal the regime of resource management. And so where I'm starting out at the very high, so I'm getting ahead of myself, to give you an idea, and I think that QR code actually works, but the type of stuff that I do and the description of the topic, I think fits in. It just says kind of vaguely, land use regulation, farm succession. All I'll be able to talk about today is just a couple of tiny little thoughts. But I'm really directing y'all to this, to where, as best as so far, I deal with the issues of verbal tenancy, of leasing, writing wills, trusts, limited liability companies, all these different things that go into the idea of disposing of land, managing land, and all of that. The most popular article that pops up on this site is the property rights of the surviving spouse, which, I'll make a comment about that. But I want to point you to two resources. Planning the Future of Your Farm. There's a PDF on the Farm Law site. I don't have it in print anymore, but Tobacco Trust Fund has been kind enough to give me a grant to revamp it. So that's in process right now. And this is the most recent handbook. I called it So You Inherited a Farm. It's really for those who, and I would say my generation, I'm a Gen Xer, that are now, this land is coming down, so to speak, from a generation into our hands. And we're asking questions about property taxes and somebody's farming on this land. What does that mean? What's our relationship and all stuff like that. So, but also I put in there a number of what we call go-bys, and lawyers call go-bys, samples of option agreements, samples of LLC language, of trust language, of things like that are meant as a guide that for those of y'all who are really, intent on keeping land in the family or making, serious conservation commitments to it. It's just a guide to help professional advisors and you to navigate that. Anyways, all those are links, and so here's my real high level and long ago, if I may, and I'm a teacher now, so I go into this with the students. Having a chance to study this more in depth and really learn more about the law. Because when I was practicing, I'm working on projects and all that. But sorry for all the words, but to me, the fascinating part about learning about the whys of our property laws has really taken me very far back into English common law, which is our law. That's where our law comes from. It comes from a 1,000-year history of England and how they dealt with property issues. And the other fascinating thing about it is the concepts of what we now expect in terms of our property rights are protected by these concepts and really in the development of representative government. And so when I look at our history of law, I'm looking at really two tracks of English history. One, the development of representative government, where we, the people, eventually we would have a say, but also all the rules of how you own your property, how you and your spouse own your property, how you and your siblings own your property, the rights of the tenant that's on that developed also over 1,000 years of court cases and disputes. And one of my favorite quotes, which I know you can't see, from Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, famous Supreme Court jurist, "The life of the law has not been logic, it has been experience." And that's the rules that we live under now are just the experiences of our ancestors fighting over land. And I found that fascinating. So that's as far as I'll go with that. But the note that as we move into land regulation, I always want to frame this. And for land regulation generally, and in the rural land space, farming and forestry with the principal land uses, but also extractive uses such as open mines, things like that, is generally a state matter. The federal government, except for several key areas of pollution control, doesn't generally intervene with its laws and regulations into private land ownership and use. That's been something that's traditionally been the purview of the states. But how we structure it in a state like North Carolina is we're a Dillon's rule state. And that's a late 19th century judicial concept that means local government does not have inherent authority. And so everything that we do in our property tax laws, our sales tax laws, our zoning laws, our sedimentation law, things like that, that all exists because we, the people at the state level, have said so. Not Orange County has said, well, we're going to do it this way. Now, there is flexibility. There's a lot of flexibility, but we also go through different periods and trends where the state might be withdrawing some power from the counties, and that's we're seeing that right now with some of these property tax increase moratorium that are going on. But that's, as I talk about land use regulation, and that's the backdrop I'm going to do it in. And what do I have here? Observations on land regulation and forestry. That's from here on out. It'll be just observations. So the idea here is when we think about the land, and we think about its role in our ecological systems, our water quality systems, however we want to look at it from its environmental standpoint. We've chosen, as a matter of policy in the United States, the approach that, unlike more intensive industries like electricity generation, like making chemicals or plastic or whatever it is, manufacturing automobiles, that those externalities that come out of those processes into our air and into our water, we have the benefit of having sticks to say that you can't do that. You can't build this factory unless you show us how you're going to internalize all your pollution, or at least that to which we've developed standards for. With open land, it's somewhat different. We don't treat it that way, really, under the long policy encouragement that we want free use of land. We want economic use of land, generally in farming and forestry, but like I mentioned, there are other uses also. There's solar. There's going to be some mining that goes on here and there. And as we all know, the data centers. Those are now kind of overwhelming a lot of local communities in terms of discussion. And so I look at the way we incentivize keeping your land in farming, in forestry, generally as permeable surface, as a system of carrots, incentives. And there's going to be several discussions here today about what that looks like in terms of conservation programs and funding opportunities and things like that. And so, but under the theory that encouragement like that, money that we the people as taxpayers put into the whatever pot it comes from, benefit from your decision on your land. And so a point I'll make, which I think is really going to be emphasized when y'all hear about the property tax discussion, you hear the property tax discussion and the zoning discussion, is that when you think about the exemptions, and I've jumped away from that, but farming and forestry have broad exemptions in federal environmental law, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, the Solid Waste Act, RCRA, all those types of statutes, just straight out exempt farming and forestry activities from the requirements of point source regulation and things like that. Dust from a combine, it's combining soybeans, that's not considered putting particulate matter into the ambient air because farming is exempt from that. But the point I want to emphasize about the land is with your property tax, with your zoning, all that, my view is that this all comes back to actual income production from that land. And so as time has gone on, I think that farming has become a less what I would refer to as a subjective view of, the tractor, there's a silo, they're farming, they're managing the land, to something like, well, we're going to be more objective about is the land being managed to earn income, to be selling a product. And so you will start to see our laws start to objectively coalesce around that. I think it's happening in zoning. It's happened in property taxes. And so I'll keep making I'll make that point that proof of farm income from the land, whether it's yours or your tenants, or your plan for cutting down trees 30 years from now. That is what we generally look at when we're exempting farms, forest lands from zoning regulations. We're qualifying them for preferential property tax payment treatment. Sedimentation laws generally exempt farming activities, but once you fall out of that farming category, these laws start to come in and apply. And I think what will be discussed here is one of the challenges as landowners, people who are operating that land, look for more income opportunities. How do we keep those income opportunities as farm production rather than an entertainment enterprise or something else that doesn't quite look like a farm? I don't know if you have time. And so that's not what I wanted. Can I just not do that? There we go. Okay, good. And I'm going to leave it to the tax department to talk about that. I'm just giving you one illustration about farm income. I call this connect the dots. But when we look at the bona fide farm zoning exemption, for example, we're looking at qualifying your parcel for that with proof of income. And so that y'all can look. I don't want to steal any of the thunder from the property tax office. I'm going to leave this there, but you'll see where if you're going to be exempt from zoning as a bona fide farm, you're going to be showing either property tax qualification, which is income based, your qualifying farmer certificate, income based, your Schedule F, you're earning income and reporting to the federal government that you're earning farm income. So it's kind of a state of that. But the point being is that for these land use exemption regulations and things like that, even getting advantage qualification for conservation easements and things like that, I would generally say that your goal, this is where your starting point is when you're thinking about how you manage your land. So, observations on farm succession, if I may. So this is, as Mike mentioned, I did a lot of this work, and I always say from Clay to Currituck. I operated here at Hillsborough, but I didn't want to do traffic tickets, so I wanted to work for farms. And so I drove all over the state. I don't think it's quite penciled out, but I got some good experience. And so these are my little, observations. As best as you can, when you're coming up with what I call your property disposal plan, which is your estate plan, your succession plan, however we want to talk about it. Really what you're talking about is putting words on paper that are enforceable in court under our state laws for disposing after you've passed where your interests go. Because it's like interest in land are like water. They have to go somewhere. They don't just go to this vague, place. Eventually, yeah, we might not find out who owns those, but there is somebody out there who inherits from you if you don't decide who, by words on a document, who those interests are going to go to. And so the first observation is try as best as you can to not give a parcel of land to your 2 children or 3 children. I say this because you may only own 1 parcel of land and you're trying to figure out what to do with it, how to divide it up. And if your kids get along, and I say kids and they're almost 60, then fine. But they're going to have to sort that out. I say that really more in the going concern farming context. And let's say if I was out east somewhere, we're talking about sizable, grain operation. I'm trying to keep the off-farm kids off the land, off title to the land that the farm operator needs control of. Now, there are other ways of doing that, but that always has to be sorted out. When 2 people unmarried own title to the land, that has to be sorted out eventually. And so if you're in the lucky position of having different land holdings, different asset classes, things that you can spread around, do that. Don't try to avoid when you have land and you want to keep it for a use or have it, make sure it's available for use, avoid the share and share alike and will. Do something specific with it. The estate tax, not a thing. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. It's driven our minds on estate planning forever. And I was very lucky to, grow up in the time that I was practicing in a time we had already decided that we weren't going to have a $600,000 or $1 million federal estate tax exemption. We were going to have a $12 million. Now we have about 15 or so. I have the numbers here in a minute. And for most people that I would, again, from all over the state, didn't have that issue. Didn't have more than $15 million in assets. Not unencumbered anyways. You have a lot of equipment on the big farms, but a lot of that's encumbered with liens. And so I had the luxury of, if something like that came through my door, go to some white shoe firm in Raleigh, with all the fancy trusts and charitable donations and all that kind of stuff. That wasn't really my thing. I was really more, how are we going to divide this stuff up? What's our plan for what the people that survive you are going to do with this land and the assets available to farm it. I'm going to say my new term is next gen buy-in. If this is your thing, I say critical in setting up a system of obligations to protect, and I tell your legacy. So if I can step outside, one of the reasons I favor this term land summit rather than your land is your legacy, because I don't know that it is. And I'm now coming across enough people in the elder generation who feel significant stress that we're saying, this is you, this land is what's going to be remembered of you. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm preferring to not place that psychological burden on people because the land was owned by a dozen families in history before yours owned it. And so it's land. It's like, if it's important to you that it continue and you share that, that's great because that's going to motivate you to do things with it that take work, like getting a conservation easement, like operating it as a farm, things like that. That's all great. Where I kind of go now these days is your legacy, and I'm putting that I tell, includes an orderly distribution of property. Because who in here served as an executor to an estate? Okay. I'm saying that because I'm talking to some people that know what kind of work that is. And you're shaking your head. It can be not just work, but a real arduous chore. And so working with folks who've inherited land, with folks who are going through the estate settlement process over the years, things like that, to my mind, it's like, it's not that we're going to remember mom and dad because they, it's like, we're going to remember them not fondly because they didn't have a good estate plan. But we're definitely going to remember that they didn't really address these issues. And now our adult lives with our adult kids and our adult jobs and all that now also have to sort out this other part of it. And so I'm saying that's part of your legacy is going through the planning process and getting things down on paper for an orderly, non-vague distribution of property. And that's all it is, really, to my mind. Farm succession, estate planning, whatever we call it, it's just a property disposition plan. You can't control what the people do later. And more importantly, you can't paper over people. So when I talk about these things like trusts and limited liability companies to manage land, it's still people. Now, the words on the document give the people, if they need to press their claim, if they need to press their interest, a foot in the courthouse door. And our laws, our common law in North Carolina, and sometimes our statutory law, interprets words on the paper and instructs judges how to divide a property. And so, and lawyers, we go to continuing legal education and try to get up on the latest court cases about how, to my grandchildren has been interpreted in a will. Like, who does that mean? When we start talking about classes of distributees and folks like that. And lastly, I'll say you can't make it perfect, so make it flexible and change it when things change. And that sounds trite and easy to do because a lot of us go through the estate planning process and be like, okay, done. I don't want to do that again. But to my mind, it's like a car driving off the lot, your will or your trust. It starts depreciating rapidly because time is still moving on and people are still growing and financial situations are changing and people's health is changing and all that. And so I'll talk about why I totally favor trusts when talking about distribution of land in a legacy format or one where you wanted some measure of influence over what was done with it later. I can still about 5 minutes, right? Yeah. It was just my observation on succession planning. And so I want to address this really quick because this also is in the, and forgive me for using the term nursing home, it's my generation. That this often comes up. It's like, well, we got to do something here because we don't want this asset to go towards paying elder care. My comments on that is that the legal practice of elder care, any elder care lawyers in the room? Okay, I'm somewhat safe in saying this. A lot of it is let's plan this stuff and organize these assets so you can qualify for Medicaid. Let's see if it works. The comment that I make about that is that if that's the plan, if the idea is for the elder person in this mix, the owner of the property, to go off, get to give up all their wealth and turn their future completely over to whoever's going to care for them to qualify for Medicaid, okay, that's fine. And I think every person has to, I don't see that happen very often. Most clients I worked with, the children just, they didn't usually have to sell the farm. They just depleted a lot of assets paying that $8,000 a month at the care facility. And it's just a reality. It's just how we've set up our medical system. It's bigger than what I can advocate for change. But the point I'll make is that if anybody has that as their plan, then just always be cognizant that we're always looking at how we do away with the safety net, with Social Security, Medicaid. Not making a partisan or political statement, just saying that that's policy, that's published policy, that we want to dial back on public assistance for disabled care, for elder care, things like that. It's just a reality of our arc right now. And so if that's your plan, I say be cognizant of it, that it has to exist for that public assistance to work. But it doesn't quite work that, you have to dispose of the assets. It's not as if the nursing home care facility, takes a lien on your property and just lets you go and stay until later. Now there's exempt property. Sometimes a farm can be exempt property depending on how much is around the residence. But that property is still recoverable. Just the idea is that there's no cake and eat it too with Medicaid. That's my general view of it. Okay, enough of that. Property ownership 101, real quick, because it said that on the agenda. Always just want to make is that when you're thinking about what's going to happen with your land, always be pretty clear about how it's owned. The one point I'll make here is that we really have two forms of property ownership. Joint property, which is now most common to married couples. And that's when both of your names are on the deed. It belongs to both of you jointly. You each have a 50% interest, but when one of you passes, the other one just automatically assumes your interest as the joint property title holder. It doesn't go into your estate. It doesn't pass anywhere else. And so, but the point I want to make is that it's my belief, based on my own research, based on what the statute says, that inherited land, that when you inherit property from an ancestor and you're married, that's not marital property. The equitable distribution statute for divorces says that. And my point is that that's land that will still go through your estate. And a lot of people do two things. One, they'll go down and get their spouse's name. They'll go down and get their spouse's name added to the deed, and it becomes joint property. And that's done all the time. Or they might make some more intense distribution plan and try to keep that family lineage in the going to their children and not necessarily to their spouse free and clear, because there's two certainties in law. The law is built around two certainties. One is what? What's the big one? What does everybody do? Yes, all property law is built around death. What's the second one? Well, there's taxes. No, remarriage. Is it that anybody can remarry? So when somebody gets a property interest, it's like that person remarries, they might bring a whole family with them to the parcel. And then suddenly that, and I'm saying this in the context of my sensitivity to using land as its future in farming, that, whatever will be. Land might exit your family and be sold and maybe even carved up in little pieces, and somebody can get a little piece of it and have a nice little farm. That's something I think is probably going to become more common. And I think it's common now. The other one is how you default inherit property, and that's tenants in common. And in that situation, each owner can do whatever they want with their interest. They can give it away, sell it. I'm running out of time to go into the details of the tax issues of disposing of property, but there's only three ways: gifting, selling it, or dying with it. I've already said 15 million per person in this room exemption. So at the federal level, you don't have to worry about it. We don't have an estate tax in North Carolina anymore. So if you're above $15 million, yes, you need some really advanced planning. But for gifting, just know that that's challenging with land because you pass on your basis. Selling, just always know you're going to have the capital gains thing there. That includes conservation easements. And I encourage people that when they're talking about selling land, disposing it, have a very early conversation with counsel about what to do with those proceeds and whether or not you're just going to pay the 15% tax on them, or whether you're going to roll those over into an investment in property somewhere else. It can't be done at the closing table. It can't be done at later. It's way in advance. And so make sure that that's always on your mind. Lastly, I'll say just about that's the last thing I'll say. All those little articles I was showing up there, that's just all this stuff. You can do nothing. And then the intestacy law takes over. I always have a pet peeve when somebody stands up there and says, if you don't have a will, the government has a plan for you. The government is that second body, that branch that's controlled either by the president or the governor. The legislature is we the people. That's us. We make those laws. And so we the people have made a law in terms of how your property will be distributed if you don't have a distribution plan in a will or a trust or anything like that. The will is going to be your simple one. The reason they call it testament is that you're announcing to the world. It's a public document when you die. That's how we know how property transfers. It's not a secret. The trust, which again, I'm saying generally revocable, my go-to instrument for medium planning or concern for future use of the land was at play. We wanted to make sure that there was very clear language about how property would be distributed and under what circumstances. The trust, to my mind, when I say you can't make it perfect, make it flexible, that's what I'm talking about. It's a document that you can go in, I think, and more easily change. You can easily change a will, but with the trust, it can be a one-page amendment. It can be many things. I want to make a differentiation, and the hook comes out. I often hear people wanting to manage land long-term over multiple generations in a trust. My preference, no. Design the trust to terminate after the property is distributed. And then let everybody make their own decisions about what to do with it. Don't keep trying to say, well, you got to do this. If you want to do that and they got next gen buy-in, everybody's on board with doing this, I say your limited liability company is the way to go. That to me is the long-term management option for land rather than using it in what I see as really a testamentary disposition instrument of the trust. I go into these things exhaustively in the articles and whatnot on Extension website. That's the resource, farm law and tax for producers and landowners. And I'm around all day. So.
Wow, thanks so much, Andrew. Thanks for the planning department, but we may have time for one question while I'm doing that. Again, we're going to keep 30-40 minutes at the end of the day for general discussion. And if Andrew's around, you can track him down here or somewhere in the building to ask individual questions. Thanks so much.
I forgot to read my quote from the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution. One thing that's complicating all this is our private property rights. So